Is the UK producing enough scientists and engineers? Are the government and private sector spending enough on research and development? And how does innovation translate into internationally competitive industries and well-paid jobs? The UK Innovation Report from Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy tracks these important questions and more. The report, released annually, puts the UK's industrial and innovation performance in a global context and brings together in a single place innovation and value-added indicators in a concise and accessible format. To recover from the pandemic and thrive, the UK will need to modernise today's industries and reduce carbon emissions while nurturing the industries of tomorrow. This will require a clear understanding of the interplay between innovation and industrial performance, making the UK Innovation Report an essential resource.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tim Minchell. I'm the Dr. John C. Taylor Professor of Innovation and Head of the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge. So we're absolutely delighted that you're all here today, and thank you for everybody online who's joined us today as well. I have a fairly simple role. One of the key bits is there is no fire alarm or fire drill planned. If the alarm goes off, this looks like the best door to go through, or possibly that door, and follow the green signs outside. I will just do one thing, which is to talk you through the agenda, and then I'll hand over to Lord Sainsbury, who will say a few words, and then on to the lead author of this year's Innovation Report, Dr. Carlos Lopez-Gomez, and then we'll have a panel discussion to talk things through. But that, in a little more detail, is on this slide here. So Lord Sainsbury has kindly agreed to set the scene for this report, building on the last 2 years and also reflecting on his own experience as a minister, how useful this data is and would have been and will be in the future. Carlos will then give an overview of the key points from the report. The report, by the way, is now available for download. Is that correct, Carlos? Yes, from now, from the CIIP website. More on that in a moment. And then we shift to this panel discussion, and we're delighted that we have such a great panel to talk about some of the issues arising from the report. We have Amy Stone from ADS, Miles Gray from DBT, if I get my acronyms right here, Nina from Make UK, and Caroline from the Food and Drink Federation. And the idea there is that they, along with Carlos, can respond to some of the key things coming out from this year's report, but there will also be a chance when we've posed a few particularly focused questions, to have questions from the audience here, and for those online, please feel free to submit your questions as well, and we have Elizabeth, who will be channeling your questions to me to be asked at the appropriate moment. And so, without any further ado, could I please ask Lord David Sainsbury to take the stage.
So thank you for that introduction. I think today in the UK we face an extremely difficult economic situation. Along with the other G7 countries, we've been experiencing since 1990 roughly a slowing rate of economic growth. At the same time, and this is the remarkable thing about it, the economic profession is not able to agree on an explanation why as a country, our economic performance is so poor. Low demand is the most popular explanation, but some think that poor human capital is the explanation, and some even think that the problem is one of productivity mismeasurement. When you think that actually all G7 countries are experiencing this, it will obviously be obvious to you that the explanations which refer to the tax system or demand in one economy are clearly not the explanation of why all G7 countries are failing in this way. It's also, I think, of interest that no economist I know of is saying that the slow rate of growth has anything to do with competition from abroad. Now, this inability to explain why we have a slow rate of growth is clearly a major problem for policy making. Because obviously it's difficult to know how to fix a problem if one doesn't know what the cause of that problem is. I should say, however, that my experience of government, the lack of an explanation of why one has a problem does not seem to worry most politicians, though I think it does explain why so much policy making is of poor quality and achieves very little. My first experience of policy making in government was when I was a junior minister in 1998 in the Blair government, and I was in the DTI. And Peter Mandelson announced that we're going to have a policy document on the knowledge economy. And the way this was organized was one of the DGs was given the job of producing this report. And the first action he took was to write round to all the ministers and the officials and say, have you got any ideas that should go into this knowledge economy report? So everyone started thinking what they might put into it. And then someone said, well, we ought really to have some figures and statistics in this report. So the economics department, statistics department was asked to produce some economic facts and statistics to go in the report. And we then proceeded in two parallel streams, one stream producing the economics and statistics, and the other producing the policies. And it didn't occur to anyone that you might just start with the statistics and the information, decide what the problem was, and then produce actually the policies to deal with this. Now you might, I at the time thought this is probably just a lapse in government, but I discovered this was very typical of the way that government went about policy making. You started with some clever ideas and then you applied them regardless of what appeared to be the problem. So before we start producing policies to increase our rate of economic growth in the UK, we need to know why it's been so slow in the recent past. And if you look at what happened in the global economy in 1990, it's easy to see why we and the other G7 countries have a slow rate of growth. Because around about 1990, which is when this declining rates of economic growth started, three main economies in the world began to be transformed into dynamic market economies. Deng Xiaoping started introducing market reforms into China. He started some of that a bit before 1990, and some of it came afterwards. But 1999 was when the big reforms of privatization of state ownership began. Finance Minister Manmohan Singh started liberalizing the Indian economy, while the Russian Federation collapsed in 1990. And that meant that, for example, countries like Poland, which had been market economies before they come under the communist influence, they began to grow pretty fast, particularly as German industry put factories into Poland. Now, what this meant was that all G7 countries round about that period started to experience a vast increase in competition from these huge countries which had much lower wages. When you take a country with over 1 billion people like China and you turn it into a market economy, that has a big impact on the world economy. And you can see the result of this increased competition if you look at the British figures. For example, the UK manufacturing sector, which has a relatively high value added per capita of £45 an hour, has shrunk, while low value added services such as food services with an added value of, say, £20 per hour have increased their share of the economy. And that is the explanation of why we have a slow rate of growth, because obviously If you take high value-added jobs and they decline in the economy, you replace them with low value-added service jobs, that damps down your rate of growth. So the reason we have a slow rate of growth is quite simply, we have a slow rate of innovation, and we're no longer producing enough high value-added, innovative, world-beating products and services which we can sell for premium prices in world markets. And that is a very simple reason for this, and it really has to be the starting point for asking what we need to do to get a higher rate of growth. If you doubt that this is an explanation of our low economic growth, I will ask you to look around your house and your garage and look at what are the products that you have there. If I look around my study at home, I see I have an Apple computer, I have an Apple iPhone, I have a Cisco telephone, I have a Canon printer, and I have a Swatch wristwatch. And actually the colored paper clips, which I rather like having on my desk, they of course come from China. And that tells you pretty much, gives you a feel for what is happening in the world economy. There just aren't enough British products. And if you go back, of course, to those great periods when we were the leading industrial country, growing very fast, it was back on the back of brilliant products which we were selling around the world, whether it was Sheffield steel or ships coming from Newcastle or Glasgow, or whether it was steel or whether it was cotton goods coming from Manchester. So in these circumstances, what do you need to do to achieve a 2% rate of economic growth, which would be considered extremely good in today's circumstances and would be closer to what historically we've achieved in the past? Now, the answer, of course, lies in the hands of industry. Only they can produce the innovative, world-beating products we need to compete in world markets. But the government working with industry can play a productive role, targeting support in areas such as R&D, skills, finance and demand, on medium and high-tech manufacturing companies, green industries, and other advanced industries who have realistic plans to increase that value added per capita. But if government is going to do that effectively, it needs to know a lot more about our overall record in innovation. What is happening in the different sectors of the economy, how our overall level of science funding compares with other countries, and how well it's targeted to help different sectors of the economy increase their rate of innovation and become more competitive. And that's why I think this report on this innovation report of the Centre for Science, Technology and Innovation at Cambridge, which has been produced under Carlos Lopez Gomes, is so important. It contains an enormous amount of important information about the UK's innovation reports, which is essential for the government to know about if it is to develop the policies necessary to speed up the innovation rate of UK industry. So, Carlos, over to you to explain where we are in this situation. Thank you very much.
Lord Sainsbury, thank you very much for those framing words. And I think this is something that we're very, very keen to make sure is got across here, which is the utility of the data. Data to help make better policy is absolutely what's needed. And so if I hand the wand of power,
thank you so much,
Carlos, will you then give us an overview of the key findings from the report before we switch over to have our panel discussion. Carlos, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tim. Good afternoon. My name is Carlos Lopez Gomez, and I am part of the Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy Group, which is based at the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. So my job today is to, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of the findings of the UK Innovation Report 2023. It is a timely moment to be presenting the report today. We are now getting more data, a better picture of what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and the effects that it had on global innovation activity. Just last week, the OECD launched its Science, Technology, and Innovation Outlook, and they make the point that this is the first recession, global recession, that did not translate into a reduction on national expenditures in research and innovation. And of course, it's been busy times here in the UK. There has been a major restructuring in the government, with new departments being created, new policies being announced, and new funding mechanisms just being established as well. The new science and technology framework that has just been published states the ambition that the UK should become a global science superpower by 2030. So a lot of work to do there. Now, before going ahead, just a few words about our community in Cambridge. Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy brings together research, practice, and policy dialogue. We are a team of engineers, economists, and management professionals that are working at the interface between technology, innovation, and industrial competitiveness. So our mission really is to support effective policy making when the details of technologies and sectors matter. So please do get in touch with the community if you have any interesting policy questions that you would like to talk to us about. Before going ahead, I would just like to start saying that the development of the report required input from different people and different organizations. So thank you so much to my colleagues, especially Jennifer, David, Michele, Song Shuai, Mateus, Ella, and Elizabeth. And many thanks as well to all the organizations from the public and private sector that took the time to participate in the consultations, some of which are going to be in the panel this afternoon. Now, this is the third edition of the report, so we've been going for 3 years, and we are delighted that since we first launched this 3 years ago, many government colleagues are using it, are sharing it, sending us comments, and finding it a useful tool. There are 3 things that we want to do different. We know that there are many studies out there and lots of sources of data, but what we want to do different is to make sure that this is accessible. Sometimes this data is only accessible to specialized audiences and difficult to navigate. So we want to do these 3 things to make sure it's as useful as possible. We want to keep it accessible, number 1. So the report tries to bring all these multiple sources of data and actually curate some of the key indicators, paint a rich picture of what's going on in the UK innovation and industrial performance while keeping it accessible. The second is sectoral analysis. Looking at specific sectors is opening the black box of the economy. If we want to understand why economic performance is like that, we need to look at which sectors are doing well, which ones are struggling, and why. And a focus on sectors, of course, allows us to have this discussion that we're not just want to understand how much investment in research, for example, or how many papers, how many patents, but actually how is that related to the performance of our industries. And finally, international comparisons. Indeed, the report has been informed by best practice around the world, other reports that are available to governments in other countries, but also the international perspective looking at comparing UK expenditures on research, for example, but also how different industries are doing in market shares, for example. So, like every year, we structure a report across these key policy questions. The kind of questions that we're addressing is, how is the structure and performance of the UK economy changing? Are we, the government and the private sector, investing enough on innovation? How does innovation support internationally competitive industries and well-paid jobs? Is the UK producing enough scientists and engineers? And how does the UK compare in environmental and energy innovation? I'm not covering all the sections of the report in my presentation today, you will be pleased to know, but there is plenty of useful data in the report, so do take a look, please. I'll just start by giving you the takeaways of the report. So there's 4 takeaways. The first one is the analysis of sector trends tell us that the expansion of labor-intensive services at the expense of higher productivity sectors such as manufacturing has slowed overall productivity growth and widened regional disparities. I'm going to go in more detail on each of these as I go along. Second, a new methodology recently introduced by the Office for National Statistics has pushed up the estimated R&D expenditure of the UK as a share of GDP, just above the 2.4% target that was set up some time ago. However, the UK remains well behind countries like Germany, the United States, and South Korea. 3, the UK aerospace manufacturing is big. It is the 3rd largest in the OECD countries, behind only the United States and France. And 4, the UK food and beverages sector places significant emphasis on product innovation, and there are signs of a growing shift towards automation. But there is an uncertain business environment for the industry that might be hindering investment in innovation, particularly among small and medium-sized enterprise. So to elaborate on these points, I'm just going to go through some key sections of the report, some of the key slides as well. So this chart, what it shows is value added per job for the different sectors in the different regions of the UK. So the color codes mean different regions. But what we see is a general trend that we have a group of high productivity sectors, sectors that have productivity above the national average on the left, including finance, ICT, and manufacturing. So we have a bunch of that, and that is across the regions. And on the right-hand side, we have a cluster of industries with productivity below the national average, including mainly labor-intensive services, such as accommodation, entertainment, and administration. So what we see in this chart is that over the last 20 years, this is a change in employment. In dark red, we see that the share of labor-intensive services has increased. And we also see in dark blue that the share of manufacturing jobs has been reduced. Since these services activities at the top tend to have lower productivity growth than the national average, that means that the expansion of these services has slowed overall productivity down. And if you look at London, for example, this is London here, what you will see is that London hasn't gained the dark red. So no more low productivity jobs in London. In fact, London captures 1/3 of all jobs in finance and 1/3 of all the jobs in ICT. So those high productivity services are actually, when we talk about their growth, we're talking about London mainly. And when we see regions like East Midlands, West Midlands, and the Northwest, we see the biggest losses in manufacturing. So the biggest losses in jobs in manufacturing. So this is not the whole story, but this is part of the story that explains what we see here. We know the striking difference between productivity across regions in the UK. This is a story of London and the rest. And when we compute the effect, we see that the decline in manufacturing or in the East Midlands, West Midlands, and the Northwest has had as a consequence a penalty on productivity growth of 1 percentage point in average each of the last 20 years. And the disparities are widening as well. So just Wales in 1999 represented 65% of the productivity of London, and that figure has gone down to 58%. Moving on to innovation. For many years, we thought that the UK's national expenditure on R&D, on research and development as a percentage of GDP was around 1.7%. But in November last year, the Office for National Statistics introduced a major revision to the methodology that we use to measure R&D expenditure. This was mainly to better estimate the amount of research and development that takes place within small companies. And using this new methodology, now the UK has jumped to 2.7% for 2019. So that means achieving the 2.4% target. This is 55% increase in the estimation. And with this, the UK gains around 10 positions in the OECD ranking in terms of R&D expenditure. But however, so we hit the average. However, still lagging behind Germany, the US, and South Korea, which invested between 3.2% and 4.6% of GDP on R&D. The full set of figures is going to be available at the end of the year. We have more information about what this methodology means in the report, so you're interested in the details, we have an explainer there. But the OECD, which is the organization that actually sets the standards for the measurement, is already using these updated UK figures. Now, one target that hasn't been achieved is that of government expenditure on R&D, which is one component of the national expenditure on research and development. And one point highlighted by Paul Nurse in the recent review is that government expenditure of R&D being below the average of the OECD is not compatible with this ambition declared by the government to become a global science superpower. Another dimension that we look into the report is the top firms in the world in terms of research and development and patent activity. So this is just a summary of what you will see there, that basically the key message is that only a small number of these firms are based here in the UK. For example, this chart shows that in 2021, there were no UK applicants among the top 100 at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, and only one among the 100 applicants at the European Patent Office. In the report, we have also data on research and development, and it's very similar. Science and engineering workforce, striking fact here is that while women have tertiary education attainment levels that are higher than men across OECD countries, they are considerably underrepresented in STEM disciplines, especially in those sub-themes like engineering, manufacturing, and construction, as well as ICT. But this is an issue that we observe across all OECD countries. Now, for the final part of this presentation, I'm just going to focus on section 3, which is about industrial performance. And we have deep dives on different sectors in different years. So this year, we're focusing on aerospace and food and beverages. So aerospace, first, aerospace manufacturing. Based on OECD data, the UK ranked third among member countries for aerospace manufacturing in 2019 by value added. So we measure value added in US dollars in this one. At the top of the ranking is the United States, roughly 10 times bigger than the UK, but the UK value added is below that of France, but above that of Germany. And in terms of employment, actually, the UK has more people working in the industry than France. Productivity is higher in France, so value added per job is higher in France than even the US. The ranking is very similar in terms of trade. So the trade balance in the UK is the third largest. We have the third largest surplus in the world, and engines, components like wings are key part of this. Is 2/3 of all the UK aerospace overseas sales. If we look at the big picture at value added in the last few years, this is since 1990, we see this shape here. We see that value added was growing steadily until 2015, followed by a partial recovery. Well, sorry, it was growing until 2005, more or less, then declining until 2015, and then recovery ever since up to 2021. So it is fluctuating. Now, the issue is, however, that employment, if we look at employment, we have lost around 14,000 jobs between 2020 and 2021. So as demand collapsed during the pandemic, companies restructured, supply chain consolidated, and some of the major firms actually let some people go. So this accounts for 14,000 jobs that we lost in the industry. However, productivity is growing in the industry and remains obviously quite an important part in the UK industrial structure. Now, UK aerospace is high value-added sector driven by innovation. In absolute terms, business enterprise research and development in the UK aerospace industry was the third highest as well in the OECD ranking in 2018, behind the US and France, but ahead of Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan. The US, of course, as you can see, is off the charts. Major position, major dominant position, order of magnitude higher than everybody else. But if we look at 2010 as a reference year, we see actually that the UK aerospace expenditure is growing. It's only behind Japan that is growing a lot. Now, in terms of aerospace, some of the key questions that are emerging from the analysis. What people told us, obviously, is that many of the companies are headquartered abroad. So those investment decisions about the next generation models, the next generation products are not going to be made here. So usually in places like France, Germany, and the United States. So the question is how to strengthen the UK position as a leading industrial location that is chosen for the future models. Emerging market and technology trends like energy efficient aircraft, new aircraft segments, digitalization, space tourism. So how to ensure that we are able to address these opportunities through investment in innovation. And then the fall in the number of employees that we've just been discussing, how to retain the skills base for the future. So all these questions hopefully we'll be discussing later on in the panel. For the food and beverages sector now, according to ONS data, well, this is OECD data, the UK ranked 6th among OECD countries in food and beverages by value added. It has lower employment than other countries, here the employment. So it's lower than other countries, but still quite significant. And of course, it's the major manufacturing sector in the UK. This productivity, again, measured by value added per employee, is actually larger than Germany, France, Japan, but lower than the US. This is value added with using ONS data in two segments, food in red and beverages in yellow, both growing steadily, basically. Overall value added has increased in 2012 in the UK after experiencing drops in value added between, in this part here, 2008 and 2012. Both subsectors reached their historical highs in 2021. And actually, again, they're very important sectors. Together, if we take the 25 billion of food and the 7 billion of drinks, together, they're bigger than automotive and aerospace combined. Now, the UK has one of the biggest trade deficits in the world in terms of food and drinks. This has to do with a number of factors, but still, despite that of this trade deficit, there are some niche areas of specialization and high export-oriented products. We have the smaller drink subsector, but some high-value subsectors. And this picture tells us a little bit about the UK. On one hand, our top export is whiskey, 4.6 billion in 2021. That has reached now 6 billion pounds in 2022. This is more than the export of car engines. On average, the equivalent of 50 bottles of whiskey are exported every second from the UK. But the even better news is that our top imports are fruits and wine. And only wine imports have increased since 2020. Now, in terms of business expenditure on R&D, again, this is based on ONS data. The expenditure has increased since 2010 with an annualized growth rate, as you can see here, in food of 8.6%. It has decreased in beverages, but beverages includes tobacco products. Now, product innovation, despite this perception that sometimes we have of being less technology-intensive sector, less innovative sector, is quite a core strength of the food and drink sector. Companies need to update products beyond simple repackaging and rebranding. So just over 11,000 new food and drink products were introduced in the UK in 2021, which reflects the highly competitive nature of the sector. Now, thinking about future prospects of the sectors, stakeholders, when we talk to them, told us that, well, we have an issue because we have unfilled vacancies. It remains relatively high. Well, it's more than double the UK average, the vacancy rate in the food and drink sector. So the question is, can automation really be the solution, or what other factors need to be considered? And inflation, rising energy costs, sterling depreciation, the ongoing war in Ukraine have added uncertainty to this sector as well. So how to ensure the long competitiveness in this uncertain environment? So the investment confidence has increased. The food and drinks confidence tracker reached a record low at the end of 2021. And this uncertainty is preventing companies from investing in new technologies. And now with the transition to net zero innovation, new market opportunities there, energy efficiency, process heat decarbonization, sustainable refrigerants, and the need to replace single-use plastics. So how well is the UK positioned to address this opportunity? Now, this was my last slide. I've given you some of the data, but as Steve mentioned, the most important thing is what is the reality behind the data. So for the final part of this event, Tim will chair a panel discussion to dig deeper into some of these trends. Again, for more details, we encourage you to look at the report. It's online already. Get in touch with us if you have any comments, suggestions, or want to talk more about it. Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much. That's excellent, Carlos. Thank you very much for that. So could I ask now our panelists to join us up on stage? So we've had an excellent framing of the situation from Lord Sainsbury, saying why this clarity of key messaging and, of structuring of the key data is so important. And then Carlos giving us that excellent summary of the key points arising from the report. For those who haven't yet looked at it in detail, I would encourage you to do so. There's so much more in there as well, but those 5 themes, extremely helpful. So we have time now for our discussion, which is a key part of what we want to do this afternoon. But to start off, could I please ask each of our panelists to just briefly introduce themselves? Amy, first, please.
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Amy Stone, I'm the Senior Economist from ADS and we represent the aerospace, defence, security and space sectors.
Hello, I'm Miles Gray. I work in the new Department for Business and Trade in the aerospace team and I look after their R&D programme.
Hi everyone, my name's Caroline Kehan. I'm Head of Industry Growth at the Food and Drink Federation and we represent UK food and drink manufacturers, the largest manufacturing sector in the country.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nina Griff. I'm Innovation Lead from Make UK, a trade association representing around 20,000 manufacturers in the UK.
And I'm Carlos.
You're still Carlos.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
good. That's good. So what I'd like to do first is ask each of our panelists to comment briefly on the thing they have found most striking from what's in the report and what's been presented in summary form here, from the perspective of your own sector, or just more generally what you think is most, yes, I think what we're looking for is the most striking, the thing that surprised you the most, or made you go, that can't be right, we need to find out more information. Because one of the key things that Carlos and his team wants is to know where to look deeper for future years. And the most striking thing, unfortunately, all I can remember is that number about the whiskey, 50 bottles every second. Okay, we've got that one out, well done. Nina, do you want to kick off with your first striking thought, please?
So the striking one, I'm Polish originally, and it was the amount of Polish women engineering with engineering degree. That was a striking point. But apart from that, I think looking into labour shortages and labour vacancies that manufacturing sector is facing, that's the most important issue that manufacturing sector is at the moment facing. It's about 76,000 vacancies at the moment that are unfilled by the manufacturing businesses. And as Carlos mentioned as well, I think that number slightly lowered, but it's still almost 40% of vacancies aren't unfilled compared to across all the different sectors, only 24%. So that number is staggering, and we definitely need to look immediately into how to solve that.
Do you think there's enough granularity on those numbers? Is it clear where the real gaps are, the most urgent needs that need addressing are?
There is, but also mixture on different levels. So I think the trends, so if I'm going to go back a little bit, and if we look into the trends of manufacturers, what they do to kind of face and address the issue, and they're automating, and automation is the top trend, and digitalization. So they're trying to find solutions for the current labor shortages with the lower skilled workers, but immediately they're facing the shortages in the mid to higher level skills, 4 level, 5 level skills. So I would say it's a mixture of different skills, different jobs, but there is a list of job shortages that's available publicly, and needs to be expanded as well by some very specific job roles. I'm not a skills person, expert, but...
That's fine. That's great. Thank you, Nina. Caroline, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say a lot of the themes that emerge from the report does resonate with what we're hearing from members, so that's very reassuring. I think what I would say is one of the most striking things was looking at the productivity performance of UK food and drink manufacturing. I think if you look at the sector, maybe our performance over the last few years, we haven't seen the growth that perhaps we would have liked to have seen it, potentially stagnating to a certain extent. But I think there is a real potential to grow that further. But actually, in comparison to some of the other countries, we are actually doing pretty well. So that was quite a surprising thing to see that international comparison. So I feel a bit heartened by that. So, yeah.
That's very nice to hear, because as Carlos frequently reminds me, this isn't about looking for problem areas. It's actually also spotting the things that are going really well and to work out why they're going well and what more could be done to support them.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get into automation in a moment, so I'll save myself for later.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. Miles.
So first, big thanks to Carlos and his team for doing the report. Really appreciated it. I was absolutely terrified when I heard they were doing it just after COVID, which massively impacted on aerospace.
Yeah.
But the thing that really surprised me, delightfully so, was that the R&D business spend was increasing. Mm-hmm. And I think back to what's the one big thing that's happened to maybe cause that. It's really hard to isolate a cause. But I think about the Aerospace Technology Institute program, where government has committed to a long-term injection of R&D into the sector in a way that matches the product cycles and the product development cycles of the sector. Seems to have had an impact, or at least that's the story I'm going to stick to. You also asked me for some things that, what would I like to see probed into a little further. The aerospace sector contains 3 subsectors. There's a civil aerospace, that's the biggest one, there's defence and there's space. It would be really nice to try and get into some of that disaggregation that's in there. What's really causing this increase? Is it my space colleagues? Is it my defence colleagues? Is it civil, or is it a bit of both? And the other thing, the second thing would be, I hope this R&D has some sort of spillovers. Where are they happening outside aerospace? And to what extent, and to how long does it take something in aerospace to happen to have a positive impact on another adjacent sector? But great report, thank you for doing it, appreciate it.
Thank you, Miles. Amy.
Thanks. So I appreciate we're both going to speak about aerospace, so I'll try and pick something different.
It's all set here.
Yeah, I know. So the thing that struck me in a positive way was about the manufacturing spread, sort of the regional productivity piece. I think across the 4 sectors that ADS represents, but also in aerospace, we are really regionally spread. So it's good weight for us to have this report that shows how valuable that is back into the productivity conversation. So I'll definitely be using that and pushing that round for the future. So really welcomed that. Then on the side of things that I would ask us to revisit at another point in time, we discussed this previously, but it is on the GVA piece for aerospace that shows an increase over that difficult period that we've reflected on. doesn't align to the trends that we saw. We saw turnover from businesses decline. We saw, as the report will come on to, employment go down. Great from the R&D piece. So is that the reason why GVA looks to have improved? That would be really great to understand more. But as I say, sort of the trends that we understood from the time don't reflect on that increase in GVA. So maybe ONS will do another revisit on the numbers. Let's see. But yeah, interesting though.
Great, thank you very much. Carlos, did you want to say anything about what you found surprising about the result you presented?
I think I would just like to emphasize this point about the differences between London and the rest. When we look at global GDP, usually across the world, manufacturing represents around 16% of global GDP. The UK has around 9%, 9-10%. We think, well, we have a low manufacturing, but actually manufacturing is quite high in some of the regions, in Wales, Northern Ireland. The thing is, there's only 2% of manufacturing in London. So actually other regions are with the global average. Manufacturing keeps being quite important in those regions. The thing is, the London economy is very different. As I had mentioned, those service jobs are actually concentrated here.
That's great, thank you. So maybe just picking up on some of the sector-specific issues in a little more depth. So Caroline, you're mentioning this issue of automation and the effect it's having, or the need for it to have an effect. Can you comment a little more on that from what you've seen?
And Carlos, I know you mentioned the vacancy rate. So yeah, you know, we're sort of running vacancies at 7%, which is double the manufacturing average. And food and drink manufacturers are looking at a number of areas, looking at sort of how do we attract more labour and skills into the industry, so better pay, benefits, even looking at the way in terms of our shift patterns within the factories, can we do some more flexible options there, shorter shift patterns. So we're trying to be really creative in terms of attracting more talent into the industry, but also as part of the solution, we are looking at automation as part of that. And we were, I think pre-pandemic, we were the second largest purchaser of robots after automotive. But what I would say is that investment is not universal across the industry, and we are, 97% of the sector are SMEs. So they are really, it's difficult to make those sort of longer term investments. Obviously limited resources, huge cost pressures that we're under at the moment. But also it's just the way that we operate. Many food and drink manufacturers operate on short term retail contracts. So it can be, 3 to 6 months, and you don't know whether you'll get that contract again. So to kind of make that investment in the longer term, if I compare ourselves to aerospace, where you're working on a 20-year contract, it's very different. Highly competitive industry, retail environment, which makes it quite difficult to make those investments. So how do we support the industry to do that, to de-risk some of those investments? And we're really keen to work with government in that area to make it, get that targeted support for food and drink SMEs, because we do see a real potential. As I say, second largest robot purchaser. I think there's more we can be doing. We're also doing things as an industry as well. So we know there is great support out there in terms of the catapult centres, universities. So the FDF, we've actually developed the Food and Drink Innovation Gateway, and we launched that last week with a DEFRA event, where we're basically created this sort of online sort of one-stop shop, let's say, where we can connect food and drink manufacturers with the experts to try and, they can go into a catapult centre, maybe test some of the technologies to see if it would work, or potentially those organisations will go into the factory and do a line walk to kind of identify potential solutions. So there's practical things we can do, but again, I think there's more that we can be doing. I mean, we welcomed in the budget last week the commitment around full expensing, capital allowances. We think that will help some of our food and drink manufacturers. But again, I think there is more that we could be doing.
So is it that there's a balance from the data presented there? There's issues to do with immediate labour needs. There are issues around how automation as part of a package can be helpful, but you also need the skills for the automation process. So it's how does those three things come together in the context of very unevenly spread capabilities? Is that right?
Yeah, and I think, we do have some great success. We've got some great examples. I've got one SME business, a bakery business, based in Wales. Again, they came through the gateway, and basically they just decided to invest in some temperature control sensors on their oven. And the benefits that it was a very small investment, but the benefits that they had seen in terms of, improving their product quality, reducing energy costs. And again, they're now on their 4th or 5th project with the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. So we've got some real good examples of that. And again, to your point around skills, that is a challenge. We're hearing some companies where they've managed to make the business case for investment. They've actually delivered, made the investment, but then they just don't have the skills. So I've got, again, another company in the East Midlands. They've made a commitment to increase their production from 2 production lines to 3, but they haven't yet gone live because they just cannot get the right skills and the right people to actually run the production line. So, yeah, a lot of challenges there, I would say.
That makes absolute sense. And I guess there's also the other thing sitting there for the food sector being such a large sector is the issues around sustainability and how to deal with the innumerable net zero related challenges. I don't know, Nina, any comments on that about how this evidence shows where we need to perhaps be targeting more of our efforts to ensure net zero targets can be met?
So I can go back to skills again and to make sure that we produce the workforce for the future jobs. Some ideas of, incentivizing businesses to retrain the existing workforce by tax incentives. What we also need, this is what Caroline mentioned as well, we need the support for the SMEs that are based all around the country and not necessarily have that knowledge and expertise. They may be not as lucky to have the catapult on the doorstep or really good university innovation hub or the budget. How do they start? So there is a really small business, I'm going to give another case study, that looked into the new materials, changing the plastic food containers into using wool as the different material, but they relied heavily on university and the expertise that they were provided by that. But I think we're getting better. I think things are slightly getting better. I think post COP26, manufacturers kind of are more on board in terms of creating strategies for the net zero and trying to look into the new ways. But yeah, barriers are skills, access to finance, knowledge.
Ones that have been around for a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you say, things are getting better. But your comment there about it's not evenly spread. Your proximity to availability of a catapult centre or a university working in the appropriate area with the appropriate technology and knowledge exchange capabilities is the big issue. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely. And I can also mention Made Smart adoption program that it's working very, very successfully. There's lots of evidence that it does in Northwest. It's being rolled out to a couple of more regions. But we need a confidence backing from the government behind these programs and evenly spread around the country for the rest of the regions, because manufacturers, members come to us and say, this is a postcode lottery. And it's been like that for a while now. So we need immediate change there as well.
Levelling up.
Levelling up.
Right, I said it. Thank you very much. So maybe if we can shift to aerospace and this striking comment put up by Carlos at the end there with the summary slides about issues to do with ownership and nationality of ownership of key players within the aerospace supply chain. Miles, any comments on that?
Well, let me just check. Amy, do you want to go first? I don't want to always go first.
You're absolutely fine, go ahead.
So believe it or not, my experience of the large overseas owned companies, multinationals, is that they actually behave quite rationally. When they're looking at investment decisions about what's the technology I need to invest in, what's the product I'm going to put it into, and they're making decisions about where they locate that work, they look at a number of factors. They look at what's the quality of the universities, what's the workforce, what's the government support, what's the broader business environment, and they do a pretty objective study. I'm sure there is some politics that sneak into there, but ultimately our aim is to make the UK the lowest risk option so that they can complete the R&D in the timescale that they need And then once they've done that, they can have access to the manufacturing know-how to commercialise it cost effectively. And that's the game that we're trying to play by making the UK a good option. That includes a whole range of things, but hugely importantly is the amount of R&D support that we can provide with them. We risk share their R&D up to TRL 7, so technology readiness 6 or 7, usually 6. And that's on par with all of the other 4 major aerospace nations that were in your chart. So the US, France and Germany have all had those programs in place for many years. Ours started in 2013, and I'm hoping it's making the difference. What's the big issue? How many planes have been launched in the period of your study? Well, I can't think of any. So the real tell will be when a new aircraft is actually launched, and you look at the amount of manufacturing that the UK has as part of that plane. And hopefully, because we've invested in that technology over the long term, we will see an increase in our share of the components on a plane.
Nice. Thank you, Miles. Amy.
I don't know how to add to that. No, I think you raised some really good points, though. It is about the long cycles that are looked at, and I think that's why the decarbonisation point is really important for us as a sector right now, because decisions are being made, have been made, were made yesterday or made tomorrow about that next requirements for the new aircraft and what technologies will be. So it's really important for the UK to have some level of involvement and engagement in that, and I think that's why the R&D piece matters so much, like I say, especially on the new technologies that are coming through. My experiences as well from the conversation that, yeah, they look at a number of different factors before they commit to investment, but it does help if their sort of head of investment is originally from the UK, because they always say they have a soft spot for us, but that's probably the politics piece you're referencing more so.
So that, picking up on that point, and maybe one that links across the two sectors, this issue of these longer term cycles, these long-term trends we need to respond to, and the issue of skills. So there's clearly skills-related issues that come out throughout the research that Carlos and his team have done. But particularly for aerospace, this long-term cycles, very specialist skills required. Any comments on that, Amy?
Yeah, so it's something that we're very aware of, and working with the ATI that Miles has already mentioned, they have the technology roadmaps. So you've got an indication of where we're heading. Mm-hmm. So then you've got an indication of the kind of jobs that might exist from that. And that's something that through the different growth partnerships that we have, through industry, through government, through the different networks, we're trying to pin that down a bit more. Mm-hmm. There are some lessons to learn from automotive. I think the Auto Council have done really well in sort of managing that piece into electric vehicles and different types of batteries and the new skills that are required there. But then it obviously folds back into, and are we training those ourselves? Do we have, again, the education, the universities, the apprenticeships on offer to help support that when it comes to fruition?
So what I'd like to do now, if I may, so thank you very much, everybody, for those comments there, is open it up to the floor here and also to those online. Now, Michele, I think I saw you with a microphone. You still have a microphone. When you take the question, please, could you take the microphone, say who you are, where you're from, and what your question or comment is, please, first.
Thank you, Tim. I think this is probably for Carlos as much as anyone else on the panel. Clearly, the ONS figures indicate that Bird is much greater than previously indicated, and therefore has closed the gap to our competitor nations. What it hasn't, of course, done is shown that our productivity remains poor even compared to those competitors, taking on point David's comments earlier. Does this mean, and I think it's been commented on earlier, does this mean that we are poor at how we use those investments, how we're using that Bird compared to our competitor nations? So I didn't mention who I was. Ian Brotherton from Innovate UK.
Well, I mean, there is one part that is about the new figures. I mean, there are a number of issues there, and the figures, I mean, we can go to those technical discussions, but we will have full details by the end of the year. I think we cannot relate one-to-one investment on innovation and industrial performance, but of course it's the actual purpose of all these studies is to understand better how innovation is taking place in each of the sectors of the economy. I think what the short answer to your question is I don't know. But perhaps what is worrying is that not many people know. And the idea is that, if you go and look at other countries, you have these detailed studies of innovation trends in each of the sectors of the economy, and looking at what are the future skills needs, what are the productivity drivers, how competitive they are internationally, and how, if you put all together, then we have a national performance as an outcome. So I think my answer would be, I don't know, we should know, let's find out.
Well, it's a perfect answer, right?
For everything.
Yes, thank you, Carlos. Any comments other panelists want to make on that before we look for other questions? Or has Carlos nailed it perfectly?
I don't know either.
Thank you.
So I don't know either, but I think we were discussing earlier before the session kicked off about how does R&D directly translate to the output level that you're expecting? So while looking at the figures, is that the thing that you should be looking at? Or are we actually just really good, as this was your example, are we really good at doing the thinking, but not necessarily always the making? And is that something that is showing up in the figures somewhere as well?
Thank you. Gentleman here, please. Beg your pardon.
This is a question from one of our online participants, Professor Al Said. He says, how can we bring more diverse skill sets to contribute to innovation in the UK, particularly from other parts of the world? Are there any policy recommendations?
Oh, would like to go for that one.
I can go for that one. Policy recommendations. So manufacturing sector is not very diverse in terms of the workforce. Make UK, we've done a report in 2021 stating the workforce, 29% of female workforce. And only 12% of that was the women represented in the high-skill engineering roles. So there's quite a lot to do, I think, to kind of present the manufacturing sector as a very attractive sector for the groups not equally represented at this moment, but also what I want to say is that the recent activities like pandemic and the fact that manufacturers are digitalizing, digitalizing and changing the way they work, and that has a massive impact on the workforce. Almost like half of manufacturers providing flexible working for the employees now, which is a big step for such a traditional sector. So hopefully we're going to get there. Hopefully, I don't really have any policy recommendation as such, but I think the change is there. And
I think, for food and drink manufacturers, we are located everywhere across the country. And for us, people can, come into the industry at an entry-level role and work their way up. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to kind of diversify our talent pool, which food and drink manufacturers are starting to do. So I think we're starting to see changes there. And I know female participation in food and drink manufacturing is actually somewhat higher, let's say, than maybe some other manufacturing sectors. So I think, people are interested in food and all of our sort of challenges around health and sustainability. I think that will be a real draw to bring different types of people into our industry. So I wouldn't necessarily have a policy proposal as such. I think it's more upon industry to do what they're doing and more to attract those different types of people.
I kind of wanted to add that this is probably for the industry to take up and make some changes. Like 20% of current workforce will retire in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So there needs to be some hard thinking behind that, like how to attract more people, younger, different.
Yeah, and I know that our manufacturing sectors do work together, but I think, working with government, there is something around the image piece. I think that is, and I know we've been talking about this for many years, but I still, there is still yeah, there's still more we could be doing to get working in partnership to kind of showcase what the industry is about. And I know that we work with Make UK and others around sort of opening your doors up, like a manufacturing day where we all open up our doors and bring local
26th
schools.
of September.
There we go, 26th of September, bringing
Shameless plug.
schools into into the industry and see behind these factory doors, you know, what actually happens. So.
I'm so tempted to let that conversation take over the rest of our session. That's such an important one. It's a great, great point. But Miles, you had your hand up to respond to that one. You
I think it's brilliantly covered.
Amy, anything you wanted to add to that?
I'm okay, thank you, Dave.
Great, thank you. That's such an important topic. And yes,
We could go on for,
absolutely. There's a question here, I believe. And then one there. And then we'll go back online.
Great. So John Saltmarsh from the Energy Systems Catapult. I was a bit surprised and to see, I think, Carlos, that you had the sort of the utilities sector as one of the sort of low productivity, low wage parts of the economy. I may have sort of misunderstood that. But you know, given the huge change that the energy sector is going to have to go through, you know, it's clearly it's going to require a huge amount of sort of new skills and one would hope sort of higher paying jobs. But the sort of the question that I was sort of wondering was, you know, can sectors move from being a low productivity area to being a much higher productivity area, or is it just that, you know, intrinsically some things are always going to be down there as they're pulling the rest of the economy down?
I will do what the analysts are there. But no, I think actually utilities is on the left, more on the left, and the chart is actually quite high. Employment is very low in utilities actually, and yeah, and then you have mining that again is very high, very low employment, but it's also not assigned to specific regions of the UK, including oil and gas. So it is very capital intensive, but not that labor intensive. Utilities as a sector. Now, the questions about whether sectors move. We have done similar analysis, but instead of regions, looking at countries. And there is still a tendency that some sectors that are exposed to international competition, for example, so tradable goods, tend to be more productive. There's more competition. There's not so much competition in regional industries that are not really competing internationally. But there are exceptions in every single sector. You will have high productivity activities in low productivity sectors, and that is across the board as well. You will see, even very high productivity textile products in France, or food products specialized in Italy, or you will have certain services as well. But in general, the picture looks similar around the world.
Thank you. This lady here, please, and then Elizabeth. Could we get one from online, please?
Thank you. Lorenza Monaco, UCL Institute for Innovation Public Purpose. I have two questions to the researchers. I understand that the report was just released as we entered the room, right? So we couldn't have a look at it in detail yet. So one is, and sorry for asking the uncomfortable question in the room, but when we talk about these impressive figures in terms of labor shortages, we have discussed skills mismatch, different causes, also partly touched on COVID, etc. I was wondering to what extent you look at causes, exact causes, and the policy implications of these labor shortages. From what point of view? Is it early to understand, for example, looking at employment composition per nationality, the British, non-British, so the Brexit effect, and what are the sectors that are suffering the most after Brexit? Because this, of course, leads to policy implications that go beyond the manufacturing and innovation policies. So how soon is it to rethink strategies to compensate for the Brexit effect? And the second question is, do you have a breakdown? I mean, these positive trends in terms of R&D spending, are interesting. Do you have a breakdown, or can you say a bit more of the type of R&D across sectors, and what is the share of R&D going towards net zero goals as part of the total picture? I would be interested in knowing more. What are the sectors that are spending more in this regard, and what are the sectors that are faring lower in the... Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll give Carlos a moment to collect his thoughts there on the second one. But on that first point about the Brexit effect and what do the numbers really show us, I think, if I may, yes, I'll bring this to our other panelists to comment on that, because you're seeing this firsthand and can have a good sense of this. So, Amy, did you want to comment first on that?
Yeah, happy to. So I think in our sectors, obviously, we saw a massive restructuring during the pandemic, which the data shows, I've referenced already. So whether or not we will have the skills to fill that in the UK, or whether we would typically have looked for those internationally in Europe or whatever, I think is yet to be seen. For me, it feels like a bit of a pull forward of some restructuring that would have happened anyway for the decarbonisation agenda. So then it leads into skills that we don't quite know what we need yet piece, as I've already referenced. Then you factor in, will we have the courses to do this, working with the education side of it, and you referenced that as well, or is that going to be something that we look to outsource? And not to throw this totally to food and drink, but on a call the other day, they mentioned that actually there are no courses in the UK for toxicology. So that's something that you would automatically look to outsource. And if you've previously got that from Europe, you may now face more of an issue. But for aerospace, I think it's more the service and repair side where we would move engineers around that I'm seeing as referencing an impact, but that's as much as I've got on that for now.
No, it's really helpful. And as you're nudging towards the issues of food and drink, Caroline, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of factors. It is an ageing workforce. It is, you know, the pandemic. People left the UK and then they haven't returned. Brexit, all, you know, it's and there's huge then competition between manufacturing sectors for people. So there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why we are struggling with our labour and skills shortages, I should say. I think, you know, we are looking at, you know, apprenticeships, and I know, you know, we are calling for a greater flexibility on the apprenticeship levy so that we can also upskill our people on shorter, sharper sort of modular training. And we are looking at automation, as I mentioned earlier. I think what's potentially missing is a workforce strategy, a joined-up approach from government. You know, there's a lot of things coming out from DWP, linked to the budget last week. You know, the Department for Education, they've got skills boot camps, T-levels, apprenticeships, and then what the Home Office is doing. But I think what's missing is that joined-up approach. That's what we would like to see, to kind of make sure that we're matching the right skills domestically with business needs. And where we can't automate overnight, or where we can't get those skills domestically, that is when we would also see a role for migration. And again, FDF were working up a position for the shortage occupation list review, where we will have some real shortages, and we're hoping to get those roles onto that list to ease, you know, in that transition period. So yeah.
No, I guess, and it's partly to the question, thank you for that question raised there, the issue of how long before we see the kind of more permanent effects of this versus the reaction effects to this. But I think we've probably given Carlos enough time now to think of the answer to the second question. Hopefully.
I didn't think of one. R&D expenditure on energy and net zero related. Actually, there's, at least we're looking at 2 data sets in the report in section 5 and also last year. So we have same section last year. And there are new data sets released by the ONS that goes in very much in detail into 2 different types of new sectors. They call them energy, David would know the name.
Intensive.
Yeah, they have different acronyms, but anyway, they're doing the data sets. You will get some information there about not only the R&D expenditure going into these areas, but also how many business identified as being working in this area. Again, trying to relate R&D expenditure with the business opportunity and the business outcome. And there is another data set by the OECD as well on energy and environment innovation. So that's also we try to analyze there. Happy to discuss more.
Thank you. There were two more questions in the room, then we'll go online. Perhaps I think here first and then this gentleman here. So Claire first, please.
Thank you. I'm Claire Porter from the manufacturing team in Department for Business and Trade. Thank you as well for a fantastic presentation as ever and the report. I've got just a couple of comments on the skills point, then I guess a question about areas to potentially explore further. So, I mean, the skills one is really, we get really challenging, but I guess a couple of observations is that another uncomfortable truth is that when we look across manufacturing sectors, we've had some of the lowest levels of industry investment in skills and training compared to other sectors. So I think there is that recognition there that actually investing in skills for quite a while has been a challenge. I mean, I think from recent Make UK reports, we're actually seeing an uptick in the investment in skills and training, which is great, same as, you know, an increase in wages, but I think it's quite a complex picture. The other thing to sort of say about it is on the diversity point, we haven't actually seen an increase in diversity changes over 15 years in female representation. So I'd sort of say that some of those challenges in terms of the vacancies go way back before Brexit. You know, I think, you know, there's real issues here. And if you're not seeing that conversion from the more STEM inputs, and, you know, great, we're getting more women and girls through in STEM and diverse groups, but if that's not converting into actual manufacturing jobs, I agree there's an image challenge there. The good news is that we as a department are working really closely with DWP, DEFRA and DFE on trying to tackle some of these things. So it's not a workforce strategy yet, but hopefully something's coming. The areas I think would be really interesting to see if it came through in the report is in that question about what you're counting as R&D, because I get the R&D investment, but actually the link between investment in new capital and skills to productivity improvements and how that's looked at globally as well. We know in the UK we don't have a brilliant record of investments in capital and existing technology. So I don't know if that was actually factored into you know, what we're looking at through innovation lens. And then the second point I think is really worth delving in. Sorry, I missed that last slide of the makeup of the companies for Aero, but really interested in the extent to which smaller companies are potentially increasing their investment in R&D and innovation, and if we're seeing any differences in the trends with that within the UK. Yeah, and size of company, family owned, those sorts of factors are really interesting to delve into. Thank you.
Recommendations going forward, or would you like a comment or two on that now?
I mean, those I think. I mean, if they're in the report, because obviously not having read the report, that's great. But I think those are the sorts of areas interested in delving into, or a comment.
That's great. Thank you for that. Anybody wish to comment on that? Or
take notes.
Frantically take. Thank you for providing input. That's much appreciated. This gentleman here, please. And then Elizabeth, if we could go online for questions.
Thank you. Richard Murray from the UK Health Security Agency. I'll let our toxicologists opine on whether there are qualifications in the UK. I think there's something out of the University of Birmingham. But what caused you to focus on aerospace and food and drink? I think probably a question to Carlos and perhaps a question to you, Tim. Given all the noise recently and some of the innovation and science and research reports published, can we expect something on life sciences in the future?
Excellent question for me to pass on to Carlos. Thank you.
Well, I think, so every year we're changing and we're focusing. Last year we focused in automotive and pharma. But actually we just completed a study on life sciences for the Government Office for Science. And we're looking not only at life sciences and biotech for health purposes, but also for non-health purposes, including industrial, biotech, and animals and other kind of industries that are not health related, because we often forget about that sector. So the idea of that report, which is also online, is it online? It's going to be online. It is to actually try to look at the picture of the sector, because you cannot find really what biotech means, especially the division between the applications in the national statistics. Many of these sectors do not really exist there, so we try to do that to give a better picture of where the UK stands. So, I mean, yeah, why they're still very important. Obviously, aerospace in terms of R&D, food in terms of size. So we kind of just went through the list, and we're going to have new sectors next year but definitely life sciences. Hopefully that will be ready next week and we'll share it with you.
Next week?
Yes, next week.
He said soon. You said next week. This is good, right? We have a public commitment.
Well, that was commissioned by Patrick Balance, and so he's interested in this question about what the UK does in outside health in biotech.
So I cannot believe the speed at which this panel has shot past this. We've nearly run out of time already, but I'm going to turn to Elizabeth, please, for picking a particularly good question from our online community.
This is the question about collaboration. So R&D collaboration is essential for innovation, but many businesses and organisations in the UK operate in silos. Any comments from the floor on how sectors are or can take a more collaborative approach?
What a great question. Nina, did you want to kick off with that one?
We had a member meeting this Monday, and someone said, we have all the players, but we don't have the team. So I'm going to just say that. Yeah, more collaboration, more involvement, more collaboration between SMEs and universities, different kind of innovation clusters, but just working together within the government departments. Industrial strategy maybe would help with that. But yeah, that's from me, that's okay.
It's such a good question. If you don't mind, all three of you, the remaining three, to comment on that. So maybe starting with Caroline, please, on that one.
I think, yeah, for food and drink, again, highly competitive sector, and actually we're probably not used to sort of collaborating because we're quite competitive with even the SMEs. You know, they're competing with the large manufacturers for shelf space. So I think it's trying to identify those pre-competitive research priorities. So where can we come together? So when it comes to product innovation, of course, that will be very competitive, but I think that longer term piece around some of the sustainability challenges, you know, healthier, sustainable diets, how could we use R&D to kind of come up with solutions in those areas. So I think it's identifying those pre-competitive areas where we can collaborate. I think it is happening in the industry, and I know Innovate UK have got a number of projects and funding programs where universities and companies can come together, and we do work closely with the Knowledge Transfer Network to bring together those sort of conversations. So yeah, I think there's more that could be done. But I think, yeah, historically it's not something that we have done, but I think we're starting to do more of that collaboration piece. And again, I think there's some interesting things that government are talking about in terms of clusters, which was part of the budget announcement. So again, I think there's some opportunities at that regional level, again, bringing universities with local businesses together. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I think for aerospace, with a particular collaborative approach to what it does. Amy, did you want to kick off with that one?
I was going to say we are collaborative. We're probably the good news story on that side, and that is partially largely thanks actually to the ATI work and how that does make sure that programs are funded literally in that way. One of my colleagues is here as well who looks after the aerospace policy, and he's just put out a report yesterday looking at the new types of technologies and bringing different collaborators together in order to get that report out to make the recommendations. And you can just see how it filters through on bringing all the different players together from, right, what do we know, what do we think we need to know, who can do it, and what policy or regulatory or skill element do we need to add into that, and then funding to be able to bring it through to market. And obviously with aerospace there's a significant amount of safety and regulation that's very important for all the right reasons, but it's also bringing that element in as well. Are we funding that side of it? Are we talking to them? Do they know what we need? And then as we're talking about the decarbonisation piece, I think the whole infrastructure conversation then comes in. Are we working with the airlines, with the airports? It's a really kind of big community on the aviation side to make sure that it does all work. Otherwise, none of it would work, really, for us.
Sure. Miles?
So I think we only fund collaborative research. But we need to keep this balance. Collaboration's generally good for innovation, spreading knowledge across different companies. But the bigger the collaboration, the more difficult it is to manage that project, and it becomes really unwieldy and difficult. And I suspect there are different areas of technology and innovation which industry are more open to collaboration. Let me give you an example. There are new technology challenges in aerospace trying to devise net zero technology. So what's a zero emissions aircraft? I don't think any company will stand up and say they know the answer to that. So I think 2 years ago we funded a £15 million study, everything's expensive in aerospace, to bring all of the companies together, as many academics who'd want to join, do a UK-wide study on what do we think the optimum technology is. That's the sort of question that lends itself to massive collaboration in a really open way. And the sector's up for doing that because there is no established leaders. There's no IP there. It's almost a non-competitive space at the moment, and then they're really willing to collaborate. When you get into really super competitive spaces where they're competing directly against each other, collaboration is much more difficult. So I think we have to think really carefully about what's the right balance for collaboration. What's really helped us is having an independent institution called the Aerospace Technology Institute that will work directly with industry. It's not government, it's an objective, independent view that will try and form those collaborations. It will help that shaping and try and match companies who are looking in similar areas of technology to work together and work together with experts in both the catapult centres, the catapult networks, and the universities. And that's an incredibly powerful voice because it's a neutral voice that tries to encourage collaboration for the good of the UK, supporting a long-term strategy, which is what we have in aerospace. And because you've got that long-term strategy, you've got something for people to aim at. So those are the factors I think are important in collaboration. It's not an easy thing to do, and the balance changes depending on what you're doing.
I'm also I'm just thinking of net zero. I think that's a great opportunity. Again, food and drink manufacturers, they're focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions, but actually when you get to scope 3,
It's got to be collaboration.
you know, exactly, supply chain, we're going to have to work together. And we are working with the Food and Drink Sector Council to actually focus on scope 3 emissions because there's no one company or supply chain that can solve it. And it's a global issue, and we have to work together on that. So that I think that will definitely be driving some more collaboration. Yeah.
So I'm afraid we're going to have to draw this bit to a close. I'm just going to ask if Carlos wanted to make any final comment, or has he spoken quite enough already?
Yeah, I think
Sure.
spoken enough.
Just one little thing to pick out, I think that's really interesting now that there's a series of these reports which picks up on an issue raised by every member of the panel and hinted at in the questions, which is these are longer term issues. These are not things that just happen in response to, say, Brexit or COVID or whatever. Those are happening and those are important, but there's the longer term issues such as dealing with net zero that absolutely require us to have a better understanding of the links between the skills, the technology and the supply chain. I am just going to pause and say, Lord Sainsbury, did you wish to make any additional comment at this point?
No, I thought it was brilliant and follows on. And I think what's interesting about this is actually getting people together around these very key issues of innovation.
Sorry, would you mind just, for the people online?
Yeah, I think it's been very successful, and it's immensely interesting how if you can get a sector talking around this kind of information, which looks at the competitiveness of the sector against others in the world, looks at how it's performing, is it increasing its value added or not, and what are the technological opportunities. This is a very fruitful thing for sectors to have, and I think therefore this report has been very successful.
Great. Thank you very much. If I can just say a couple of final words just to wrap things up. So thank you for coming along today. Thank you for joining us online. Thank you for everybody who contributed to the report, the research team, as well as all those who provided content for it. A big thank you to all our panelists here. And if you want to get involved, there are many ways you can do that. And any of the team from CIIP will be happy to talk about that. The discussion carries on. So as was exemplified by some of the comments made, this is about us getting input to support better data gathering, better data presentation to help make better decisions for policy. And finally, the report is available now, and we'd encourage you not only to have a good look at it, but also to share it as well as sending back comments. And on that note, I shall just say thank you to everybody for your time and attention. It's been a great afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. And